Hi, and welcome to Rain Radio, where we have juicy conversations that lead to powerful transformation. We are your hosts. I'm Leela H.
And I'm Naomi Calderon, and today we are going to be talking about how do you know when you need to mind your own business. So grab your journal, put on your crown, grab your drink, and let's chat. So I sit here realizing I don't have a drink with me. Luckily, I always have water nearby. So what do you think,
How
Leela?
unprepared are we?
I know.
Water of varied flavors. I'm finishing my lemon water, and I also have a tumbler of unflavored water as well.
Water everywhere.
Yeah, I overdid the grains over the last week because I got really excited about the fact that my system could handle them again. And today I am recovering from that.
Little flushing needing to happen.
Little flushing, little fasting.
A little extra hydrating.
Yeah.
Understandable.
We've had lemon water, matcha latte, and water. And my body has yet to have an interest in food that needs to be chewed. So we'll just continue down this path.
Well, there you go. Luckily, there's all sorts of options. So, the topic for today.
Yeah.
How do you know when you need to mind your own business? Part of me says, pretty much any time you think you're going to open your mouth and give somebody your opinion might be time to mind your own business. But that's a little bit broad.
It is a little broad, and it is also the same thing that came to me. I had someone reach out to me via Messenger and say, you can tell me if this is none of your business. If you got to start your sentence with that, it's none
It's probably none of your business.
And I actually did not answer that person's question. I responded to them, but the actual question that they asked never got answered because they knew. They knew from the start it was none of their business. So.
That's, yeah. Well, I'm a Leo. I'm opinionated. I got my things. I got my thoughts. And that's fine. I don't have to go sharing them with everybody, and I don't have to butt into somebody else's life to tell them what I think. And I think that in today's day and age, we're seeing that a lot online. But I've noticed that we're also experiencing that in a lot of ways in real life, too, as we start to reopen. Now, with this woman who, or I'm assuming it's a woman, I shouldn't assume that, with this person who messaged you, it's so hard to tell when something is typed because it's not like we have the option. I will sometimes put in parentheses, sarcastic font, but we can't really tell. There is no delineation between someone typing something sarcastically because there's no emphasis in how bold the type is or not, or unless they use all caps, but then they could just not know any better. They might not really be yelling at you.
Right.
So if you had to guess, was the person genuinely curious about something? Did they, and maybe it is a kind of.
No, she was asking me something very intimate.
Oh, okay. Yeah, then that really isn't. Now, I can, if you asked me something very intimate, I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, girl, that is none of your business. Because you and I have a relationship where we talk about very closely held things and intimate things?
This was a stranger. This was our first interaction.
Oh, hell no.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Like she knew, and I don't want the world going after her because that would be terrible, which is why I'm keeping this as vague as possible. But she knew that this question that she asked me was, I don't know what makes people do things like that. I genuinely don't. But she knew it was disrespectful and nosy.
Yeah. If you have to start a sentence with, I mean no offense by this, but, or this might not be any of my business, but, if you are saying that, even if you don't mean to be offensive, you know that what's about to come out of your mouth is probably going to be perceived as offensive, which makes it offensive, even if your intention is not. Now, that being said, there are times when I'll say something and it's like, oh, that was probably not, wow, okay, that didn't land well, and understandably so, because I phrased it like an asshat, unintentionally. Wasn't trying to be offensive. Right. There are times when that happens. You know, sometimes I'm chewing on both of my shoes because my feet are both in my mouth. That happens. But if you have to phrase it, if you have to pre-frame it with, now look, I don't mean to offend you, but.
And I think that, so I want to devil's advocate that a tiny bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes you can say something, or you can, like, need or want to say something. I don't know that we always need to say all the things that we want to say. So sometimes there can be a topic on the table, and you're like, okay, so this could be offensive, and I don't mean it to be, especially in today's climate.
Yes.
There's a lot of opportunity for something to be offensive just because I don't really know what I'm doing. For instance, I'm brown skinned, for those of you who are new to me. I'm very, very brown skinned. And so I sat a panel discussion on Sunday where someone told me for the first time that the word mixed, when talking about people who have parents of different ethnic or skin complexion backgrounds, is offensive. I still don't think they explain why it's offensive. Mixed is offensive. Mixed.
M as in Mary, I-X-E-D, mixed?
Yes. So, like, my enjoyable others, dad is black, his mom is white, he's a mixed kid. Apparently, that's offensive. Now, I understand asking, like, what are you mixed with being an offensive question, because I am not a puppy.
Right.
It's not
You're
like
not a
German
labradoodle.
Shepherd and Shih Tzu. Right. I'm not a labradoodle. I am a human being. Which is why this conversation, well, I'm not going to.
Would that be a shit shirt?
I was on my way up there. I was on my way up there, but I'm not going. However, so in this conversation that is happening right now in our country, probably around the world, where racism, the hatred that is called racism, is a thing, and dismantling those systems and dismantling our mindsets and our points of view and our filters around it, there are going to be a lot of opportunities for people to say, this might be offensive, and I don't mean it as offensive, but I grew up in America, so I'm probably going to say something dumb as it relates to race. So feel free to correct me as lovingly and gently as possible, and I'll try not to cry. Like, that's different than...
Yeah. If somebody said that, I'd be like, okay, this is somebody who's got something to ask, and they are uncomfortable. They don't know how to ask it. They're afraid that they're going to be offending somebody. They really don't mean to offend someone.
Yeah. That's
If
a
I heard
lot
that,
different than,
yeah.
I don't mean to be offensive, but your neck looks like a pork loin. I took that from somebody.
Oh God.
I don't mean to be offensive, but those shoes don't match that purse. Okay, you're just being an asshole.
Well, or
very different than.
I don't mean to offend, but don't you really think all lives matter?
Oh my God, I do. And because I think that all lives matter, I think that you should probably look at the fact that humans on the planet with brown skin have been dehumanized for the last 400 plus years.
Yeah,
and
I really
all lives matter is useless.
Yeah, I loved what you had shared with us in our chat, because that the dehumanization factor and being married, and it's the terminology piece, the fact that mixed, I'm still a little stuck on the mixed being offensive, and I'm open to looking at that as being a thing. But I'm also a little bit stuck still on, are there really such things as German Shepherds bred with Shih Tzus? Would they be called shit shirts? I'm just like, wait, what? But that's probably a whole different conversation of how Naomi's brain works. But the mixed, somebody asked me, and I realize sometimes it's just what we listen and observe through our own filters. Those filters have been created over the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, depending on how old we are. Those filters are constantly being created, and we're listening through the filter of our life. And somebody said something to me one day and asked me a question, and I wasn't offended by it. It was completely pertinent to the topic. And they asked me about being in an interracial relationship. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of like, huh? No, I have not forgotten that my husband is a darker color than I am. Haven't forgotten that. I've just never labeled us as an interracial marriage. Now, my mother would. Mm-hmm. I don't. I think of him as, and this is the part where it's like, ooh, that might be offensive. I think of him, he's just my husband. He's my half side. I think of him like me, that he's like me, except he has a very different background culturally. He has a very different upbringing. What's the word I'm looking for? He grew up in a different era than I did, because he's a bit older than I am, by like 18 years. So there are some definite, he grew up in the South, I grew up in the Midwest. There's some cultural differences there. But I was like, I guess I hadn't really thought about it. Now, I like the way you look at it. You're like, nah, it's more of an intercultural marriage. That to me makes a lot more sense than interracial, especially when I'm thinking of he and I.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But mixed, I mean, his mom was Apache, his dad was Castilian Spanish. Okay, I realized that no, he's not a puppy. It's not like weird Labradoodle breeding or anything. But I think sometimes our terminology changes too. I know that, and I'm not going to use any of the words because they all make me cringe, and I think a lot of them, especially in today's day and age, are offensive. But if you look at the history of our country and the terminology, I mean, we're saying Black Lives Matter. For a while, I was told you don't ever call somebody who's dark-skinned black because that's offensive.
Yeah.
And
That
yet,
came
if I
up
look
on,
at,
go ahead.
did it come up on Sunday?
Yeah, it came up on Sunday. But go ahead. If you look at
Historically, some of the terminology used, it changed over time because somebody said that's offensive. We don't want to be referred as that. This is, and so the norm became something else. Then that I don't know if we evolved or not. Some days I'm looking around going, maybe we really didn't. But then all of a sudden, that terminology became offensive.
How interesting. Forgive me for interrupting you. Carry on.
Go ahead. No, it's just so I guess in some ways I'm not surprised that someone would say mixed is offensive.
Yeah.
But you are mixed heritage. You are I'm sorry, there aren't too many of us who aren't.
I love that.
I'm a mixed heritage. I'm
so
German and Swedish, teeny tiny Swedish. Well, it's true.
Yeah. There's so much conversation for us to have, and I'm just gonna if it's okay with you, I'm gonna keep us off topic because I love the conversation that we're having.
Yeah, because we can always go back to the topic of how do you know when it's time to mind your own business.
Absolutely. And I think part of minding your own business is being responsible for yourself. And I say that because I don't identify as Black. I can acknowledge that the world sees a Black woman when they look at me.
Mm-hmm.
But growing up in a Black and Latino neighborhood and being told constantly that I'm not Black enough, I never really fully understood what Black was in a way that I felt like I could identify in such a capacity. And so part of minding my own business has been deciding who I am and then owning that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you say responsible for yourself. And I think with that, the other R word to stick in there is, and respectful when addressing other people. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that you don't stand up for yourself. It doesn't mean that you don't put your foot down or you don't just go, oh, okay, anytime somebody else speaks something asshattish. No.
Right.
But I also believe, trying to work on that, and I also believe that there are ways of delivering. You can lob something right back at somebody in a way that uses words and you're very firm, but still respectful. Now, my go-to would tend to be like, you know what? Fuck off, I'm done with you. If it hits a certain point, obviously that's not my first go-to.
Yeah.
And yet, that's where we get to choose, am I engaging or am I not engaging? But yeah, you're responsible for you. How do you view you? I love the fact that you're very comfortable with who you are. I also find it very interesting that you grew up in a predominantly Latino and Black community, but you weren't Black enough. And this is me, if I am offensive in asking this, please, I know you'll say, what was it about you that wasn't Black enough? Because it obviously not the color of your skin.
Yeah. So this is like a whole big question, and I would love to have this question with someone who has studied Black culture and colorism and hatred called racism in America. Colorism is a thing. So I grew up in
now that I think my brain just exploded.
I'll explain
that, because I think that's a more accurate term of a lot of what's happening. Yeah.
Well, colorism is discrimination that happens within the Black community. I'll explain. So I grew up in the South and in Chicago. I spent my summers in Chicago with my mother, my school years in Mississippi with my grandparents. They had joint custody. It was a weird arrangement.
Chicago in the summer is awesome. Little side note.
Yes. If you don't live in the hood, but I digress. So in the South, so like south of the Mason-Dixon line, if you are darker than a paper bag, you are problematic. If you have seen my face, you understand that I am darker than a paper bag. So growing up in the 80s and early 90s, in middle of nowhere, Mississippi, with this skin, I was other. Anybody with this skin was other. There were people my complexion who disapproved of me due to my skin complexion. Thank all the gods for my grandparents, because my grandfather happened to love my chocolate skin, and I'm deeply grateful for that.
So it's really interesting to hear
some reference point for loving it.
Right? It's such an interesting thing to hear you say that anything south of the Mason-Dixon line, the paper bag reference. My half-side grew up in a very different era than you did in the South. Now, he was in New Orleans versus Mississippi. Some similarities, some differences. And he was told, because he was Indian and Mexican, that he wasn't worth anything. He couldn't learn. He was stupid. He wasn't worth anything. He was worth less than blacks because at least they could be sold. He was told that by a teacher.
Different kind of hatred.
Yeah. So it's so interesting to hear that it's like, oh, if you were darker than that, because he's certainly not the color of a paper bag, I suppose.
So, again, I have a lot of education to gain myself in this arena, but I do know that, like, when it comes to slavery, the darker skin meant you were an outside slave. The lighter skin meant you were an inside slave, and therefore you were more valuable.
Wow. See, and that blows my mind and makes my brain cramp, and I just, wow.
Because our ancestors were not human. So
well, and I understand that because neither were his. They were savages. Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I say that, I'm not saying that literally, folks. I'm talking the stupid way that we teach history in America.
That is the way that the colonizers that settled here saw the natives who were already here and the Africans that they brought here.
Yeah.
So, it's all interesting and weird, and I'm so grateful that we have so much access to so much more information now. Super grateful for 23andMe, and it's not sponsored, although if you want to give me a free DNA test, I'm open to receiving it. If you want to give me cash, I'm open to receiving that too. But companies like that, where you can actually trace your lineage, because I can only go back to my great-grandparents. And then on the panel that I was on Sunday, one of the women said that one of her grandparents was sold with a horse or something like that. And that's how they traced the record. Wow. So, literally sold as property, not a human being. Property.
Oh, yeah. pretty much anyone who was sold was viewed as property.
Yeah. Slavery in America is a new kind of slavery.
It is
like slavery isn't new to the planet, but slavery in America was a new kind of slavery.
Yeah.
In other cultures, you could fight, buy, or serve your way out of slavery.
Right. No. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Not in the U.S. so much. Well, and so because of companies like 23andMe, since you brought them up, I think that it has shown more and more. My first college roommate was from the south side of Chicago. And she had her test done a few years ago. And I remember her posting something about, Grandma's got some explaining to do. Because somewhere in her DNA was, I don't know, it was some European, I don't even remember what it was. But,
yeah.
you know, it would register as white as mine, you know, part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just, it was one of those things where it's funny, not funny. But my heritage is mixed. So now.
We all are.
Now, I'm not offended by that but here's the thing. I'm not offended by that because I've not been, well, very rarely. There was one time. I'm not discriminated against because of my color. I'm not followed around a store because of my color. I've only twice had somebody ask me what I was. Once it was, what ethnicity are you? It was because my hair was super long and super curly, and I'd been getting ready for a fitness photo shoot, and so I had also been fake and baking, and so I was really dark. And so, well, for me, dark, not for you. You would have to lighten up about, you know, a lot of shades. But for me, it was dark, for being somebody who's typically pasty white. And they wondered what ethnicity I was. And I just was like, what? I'm not typically asked that, though. What are you? The other time, I stupidly answered a graphic designer because I didn't realize what they were asking me is what race was I.
What?
Right? Well,
because human.
I was right. But for them, well, she might have actually been meaning culture because I was going to a party where I was going to be the only white person, and she wanted to make sure I was okay with that. And I'm like, as long as they're okay with it, I don't care.
Yeah.
And then she followed it up with, well, what are you? And I'm like, I'm a graphic designer, you know, because I'm not used to being asked that question. And she said, don't. She looked at me confused. She goes, but what's your ancestry? And I'm like, oh, German and Swedish. And she goes, don't you guys sit around and talk about that when you get together with your friends? And I'm like, no. You do? She's like, oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Because wearing this skin in this country means it is always a topic somewhere with somebody for some reason.
Well, she was actually Asian. She was from Taiwan? She was from Taiwan. A lot of the people that were there were going to be, there were going to be some people from Hong Kong, some from Japanese, that were Japanese from Japan. Everybody was from an Asian country, except me. And I didn't talk to a whole lot of people because they were all speaking languages I don't speak. And occasionally somebody would speak English to me, which was fine. I didn't have a problem with it. It was nice just hanging out with people. But yeah, no, they were actually, and many of them were there on work visas. So that, I think, is a whole different thing as well. How do you get together and talk about your race and your heritage when you can't track it back beyond your great-great-grandparents? That hurts my heart for people. Unless you get a DNA test that tells you, oh gosh, I'm 7% Scottish and 52% Nigerian, and you know.
Yeah, and that's actually what one of the panel members said, because she said, I'm Nigerian, and I was like, tell me everything. She was like, I traced my DNA, and I was like, oh, yes. And one of the questions that I've been asking is, how can we stop having a race conversation? Because my interesting point of view is that we are one race. And black and white are political terms that were created to create division, and it is working swimmingly. And if we can stop having a black and white conversation and start having a human and human conversation, we will dismantle these systems so much faster. And yes, I am very aware from my own personal spiritual work that you cannot go from visible to seen and stay there and not have a whole bunch of what's happening in the world right now. So that being said, until companies like 23andMe just start handing out DNA tests and going, oh, I'm sorry, my ancestors stole your ancestors from your homeland and you have no idea who you are, here, trace it, we're going to have the experience of brown-skinned people, especially in America, needing to be black. Because otherwise, like, the world, the white world, doesn't acknowledge you any other way. So then you go back to being invisible. I know. Me too.
Right.
So I had to climb off of my we're using the wrong terminology soapbox and start looking at all of the things that need to be healed, and that's the work that I can do.
Well, and the terminology piece, like I said, it has changed. Oh, nope, that term's offensive. Okay, great. Let's come up with a different term that's less offensive. Okay, now this one is suddenly it's. I remember my dad telling me
dumb.
Terminology is dumb. I think a lot of labels for a lot of reasons are really, really stupid, and that goes beyond quote race labels, or I'm sorry, let's call them what they are, skin color labels. You know, and the one piece that does tie into the first part of our conversation of the is it offensive? When I was in college, there was a gal who used to refer to me as cracker. Yeah. Okay. Now, I actually had to ask somebody what it meant, but, you know, I also went to college with a woman who'd never actually seen someone your skin color live and in person until she went to our teeny tiny college in the middle of Nebraska because of where she grew up. She grew up in North Dakota, in the middle of nowhere on a farm in the snow.
Yeah, I live in Illinois, way south of Chicago, y'all. But I live on the St. Louis, like the Illinois-Missouri border. I'm 20 minutes east of St. Louis. And my last manager at the college that I did public speaking at grew up in a town 15 minutes from my current town and hadn't had a bunch of interactions with people of my skin complexion.
And that
it's really easy to stay in your bubble.
Well, given your geography, it surprises me. Given her geography, it didn't. In a way, although I grew up in Iowa and I grew up in a town where there were a lot of different, well, it was mostly dark skin, white skin, but there were a few. I remember going to school with somebody who was Hispanic, a couple of people who were from Laos. So there was more color where I grew up than where she grew up. Obviously, there was no color. It was all white. And yet she was one of the least racist people that I think I've ever met.
Mhm.
And what's so interesting to me, maybe because of where she grew up, because it wasn't white because they, quote, didn't let black people in. I frankly think that certain people were just very smart not to live where it's butt-ass cold. But that's because I don't like where it's cold. So, you know, it's she's in this little farm community in the middle of North Dakota.
Yeah.
And she didn't grow up with some of the same prejudices. And that's fascinating to me when I think back.
I think that well, there's no thinking about it. Hatred's taught.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
And so if there was no need to teach hatred, then there was no need to learn it. Then there was no learning of it.
Right.
And so, of course, she wouldn't be racist because nobody taught her to hate anybody based on their skin complexion.
Right.
I somehow managed to not have, I'm going to say not have issues with white people, even though I grew up in a Black and Latino neighborhood, even though I grew up in the Jim Crow South. But nobody told me, like, before my teen years, or maybe even before I was an adult human, nobody told me that white people were evil or white people are bad. Or, you know, I mean, honestly, my grandmother was afraid for my mom's life at a lot of points because my mom was an insane person. I love her very much. My mom would go partying with her white friends in Mississippi in the 80s. My grandmother was perpetually in fear of finding my mom hung from a tree. And yeah,
I can understand your grandparents' fear, and
it's legit.
That makes me cringe, you know?
Yeah. So that is reality, and yet I somehow managed to escape with the illusion that, like, humans are humans.
Mm-hmm.
What
a great illusion. How do we teach more of that?
Yeah.
How do we teach more of that?
So if you don't already have that point of view, you're probably going to have some unlearning to do.
Well, and frankly, as much as it's nice to run around as a white person and say, I don't see color, you grew up assuming you grew up in America and you did not just move here from, I don't know, France or, I don't know, somewhere. You grew up with the cultural biases that are communicated sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, through our media, through all of the things, all of the places, all of the ways we communicate this underlying bias. So I would say all of us, no matter our skin tone, here in America have some unlearning to do.
I agree, and I'm excited about, personally, I'm excited about doing that work with people of all skin tones, because it's so interesting. There are a lot of people who are like, white people, shut up, black people talk. And I'm like, does your heart hurt? I'm really not interested in your skin tone. I'm more interested in how much pain you're in. because there are a lot of people who have come to me because I am that space and are like, I don't understand why it's okay for there to be all black spaces, but not okay for there to be all white spaces. And I'm like, oh, but there are so many all white spaces. And let's talk about that confusion that you have, and let's talk about why that's frustrating and upsetting and hurtful to you. And hopefully you can get to a space where you get why those spaces are required and it doesn't trigger anything in you.
You used the T word.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go there. Anytime somebody's triggered, and I don't care who you are, I don't care what the trigger is. That's what I love when I see somebody post something, TW for trigger warning. It's like, I'm sorry, if you're triggered, that's a beautiful place to look at what and ask yourself what needs to be healed. Because if you're triggered by something, that means there's something to be healed. Now, when I hear my husband come home and tell me this story about this jackass who was like, why are you wearing a mask in public? That's stupid. Or the guy who decided to take the time out of his day to stop his car as he was leaving the parking lot of Target, roll down his window, and yell, fuck you, at my husband, who was standing by our car having a smoke. Or the little 9-year-old girl who said, my dad told me to tell you to go back where you came from. I think I get more triggered than he does. Some of it's because he's just okay with who he is, first of all, and other people's opinions of him don't change him. He's like, it doesn't change who I am. That's about them. Some of it's also because he grew up with much worse, attitude-wise, so it doesn't surprise him. Now that makes me sad too. But I tend to get more triggered than he does. So yes, if something is triggering you, if you're being triggered because there's prejudiced assholes where I live in America, so they're everywhere. And it doesn't mean that just because somebody lives in America, they're a racist asshole. Not all of us are. But if you're being triggered by the conversation of, I'm not mixed, or because somebody said you're mixed, or because, like you said, there's places where only white people are allowed, or only black people are allowed, and white people can't go in, whatever it is, if you're triggered by this shit, it's a great place to look. I don't care what you're triggered by. I get triggered when I see on television, if we're watching like murder mystery shows and somebody's raped. Huge trigger. That's my own shit. There's obviously a piece that still needs to be healed for me. Maybe it's time. But as you and I've discussed, healing can sometimes be kind of messy.
It's my favorite kind of messy, though.
It is. And
it's my favorite kind of messy because the transformation on the other side of it is
gloriously beautiful, scrumptious, wonderful, right?
Yeah.
I think, and how it shows up for me in this moment, especially those of us who are of a much lighter complexion, might want to shore up stand from a place of strength and compassion and shut our mouths sometimes, maybe. And so maybe the next show will actually be how to know when to keep your mouth shut. But anyway,
your own business, right?
Yeah.
So the healer in me is like, yes. And in order to do that, they need to do some work still, clearly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So come the happy hour.
Right? Exactly. if we give people a space, all of us, I don't care what color you are. I don't care if you are yellow, which, I'm sorry, that means you're jaundiced in my world, but whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your racial background is, the skin tone that you have. If you're super pasty white, or if you are somewhere on the scale all the way down to being super dark chocolate brown. I don't care where you fall in that. We all want to be heard. Like you said, that whole being visible piece. Being visible, being honored for who we are as a human being. And so we might want to simply allow people to be in that space. Let it be messy for a minute. Because the people who truly do want to heal and want to heal the divide will step up. Those who want to stay stuck and just stay angry will. And that's okay. That's their choice. But together, by giving people the space and grace and meeting people with compassion, including meeting ourselves with that when we do say something stupid and stick our feet in our mouth, because it does happen, or judge ourselves because we're struggling with this and we should already have this shit down. I've never had that conversation with myself. Maybe if we just showed up and created space to say, I hear you. I see you. And better yet, I know you're my equal.
Yes.
I hear you. I see
yes.
you. I know you're my equal.
That right there.
Although I got some hair envy. I'll have to admit that.
I need us to pause there. I need that to be the mic drop.
I hear you. I see you. I know you're my equal.
Wait, say that again.
I hear you. I see you. I know you're my equal.
And if you guys want to join this conversation, do so in the comments. We will look for those before the next episode so that we can address anything that comes up for you. And thank you for sticking with us as we ventured way off topic, but I think it was a really important venture.
I agree. And we will get back to the original topic.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Pinky promise.
And we'll talk to you guys next time.
Goodbye, everybody.
You are listening to Heart Over Ego Radio, a network of shows offering healing and guidance for your beautiful journey. Tune in on Mondays for the Alchemy Sisters, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 Eastern. Tuesdays, tune in and tune up. Body Awareness and Self-Care, 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Wednesdays, All for One is Love, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Eastern. Thursdays, Unbound with Cynthia Martin, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 Eastern. Fridays, The Witching Hour with Green Witch Village and the Alchemy Sisters, 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And on Fridays, Rain Radio, 10 Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Saturdays, Creating Heaven on Earth, 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And Sundays, Everyday Psychic Radio at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. This is the Heart Over Ego Radio Network.